Amit, can you talk a little bit about what it means to you to be a creative writer who also practices criticism?
As a creative writer, I embarked on what I would see as a particular kind of project in writing, which is closer to modernism, but embarked on it in the age of what might be called the postmodern or the post-colonial novel. And as I was doing this, I didn't feel I was doing something antiquated, but I definitely felt out of place. And I was wondering why I was doing this, what my compulsions were, and whether I had a history, and why that history had been obliterated or presented to us only in a particular way so that we understood the history of modernism as a European history and a particular kind of European history. Why, as an Indian, as I am, why was I? What kind of antecedents did I have? And that's when I first, I think, began to address these things in terms of the essay. But the other thing I have to say over here is I was also emerging from an academic background. I was doing a PhD here, a DPhil here in Oxford. But I did not want to write the footnoted kind of academic peer-reviewed essay anymore. So I used the London Review of Books quite often, and sometimes the TLS, as forums in which to write these essays. Which I thought were intellectual explorations to do with questions that I was putting to myself, but not scholarly footnoted work. Something else which I thought was urgent, and that's when this critical project began, into which I was also putting myself in. I necessarily had to put myself in as a writer, but also physically myself as a person who had gone out for a walk that day, was having a cup of coffee. This bit of myself was what overlapped with the self as writer, as creative writer, with the writer of the essay, with the writer maybe theorizing or thinking about something. This was the overlap.
What would you say to somebody who really loves reading your novels but hasn't encountered your criticism, your critical writings yet?
Well, I would say that they are not going to be encountering in the origins of dislike something that's just secondary to my creative writing. That the origins of dislike is also expresses a kind of creative putting together of ideas and things, which are often critical ideas and which are often ideas to do with the critical and to do with the imagination. And especially in two of the essays towards the end of the book, I think directly about Friend of My Youth, my new novel, and connect ways of reading in connection to that book, but to other books that I've read and I have written, to this friend, his real life prototype, and the way he approaches reading. So that gives you a clue as to how the essays and the criticism are part annotation, but also have their own creative life, connected to the creative work. So one's trying to move a little bit beyond, both in the so-called creative work and the critical work, beyond genre, and make these sort of boundaries more fluid.
Could you say something about the title of the book that you've chosen? I know it's also the title of the lead essay, but say something about that and about the word dislike.
The title, I thought it was a good title for an essay and for the book as well. So I went for it, but also it's a detailed exploration of some of my own dislikes. And then you'll say, what kind of dislike are you talking about? So are you talking about disliking somebody, or a kind of behavioral kind of trait, or something to do with fashion or food? And I would say that it looks like that what I dislike is completeness. So even if I'm talking about Renaissance painting, I'm making a generalization over there to talk about the urge to reproduce life in its completeness and the taste that's fostered in us to give that kind of urge and that kind of replication respect. And I'm saying I want to look at the opposite. I want to look at how the dismantling of things is interesting. So I'm saying I then dislike this monumental kind of ambition to present things in their completeness. And this, I think, runs through much of my creative work and my critical writings, you know. And not only that, I think one is in a state of tension in that if one belongs to culture, to Western culture, or any modern culture, so one has a particular relationship of either privileging completeness or as an artist saying that no, this is not the path I want to go down. There is something that I'm uneasy with about this ambition towards completeness. So just one kind of example of this, which is not an aesthetic example, is the idea of the developed society, for instance. You know, the idea that everything needs to be a kind of in a state of utopian perfectionism. And so I think the Laurentian in me would reject the perfection. It goes back a long way. My love for Lawrence also is connected with this affinity I feel for his impatience with perfection, which he sees as an ambition of Western culture and Western art. So it's a kind of meditation on not only why perfection is privileged, but what it is about ourselves that is unable to privilege this. I mean, I would, as I've often said, I would rather be doing what everybody else is doing. It's nice to fit in. Then if one doesn't fit in, why? Why doesn't one fit in? It's also trying to address that.